friends, hello rivals in the media. We've got another sensational panel put together by Millie. Thank you to the Frontline Club. Just a couple of points. Most things at the Frontline Club start late. This is the event that starts on time, and it ends on time, and it's a public meeting. So very soon, it's your turn, and if you've paid to come here, we really want you to ask for the information that you've wanted. Please don't leave here wishing you'd said something, because in about 5 minutes, that's what you are going to be doing. It's an old-fashioned public meeting. I'm going to ask you to theme your questions. Firstly, the first section, who's who? Who are the rebels, ethnically, religiously? Then the government, who's who? Do they back the military? Please come up, Lindsay. Then we'll go on to the region. Are we seeing a new kind of regional threat? Where do you stand on the question of the war on terror? Do you want to have a go at that? Then we'll talk about the international dimension finally. That's to say ECOWAS, the Nigerians sending 900 troops, and the French are obviously in that second part. So if you want to ask if the West is right to intervene, please don't ask it first. Please get there later. So we'll start with a briefing from the panel. Panel, could you give us 2 minutes on what you most want us to know when we leave this room? And I'd like to start with the gentleman next to me, Ibrahima Diane, who's the editor of BBC Afrique. BBC Afrique has been broadcasting for 50 years, has millions of listeners in 20 countries or more, and Ibrahima decides what they hear every day.
No.
Yes. And he's now going to tell us in 2 minutes, he's going to brief us, and then everyone else will do the same. Over to you, Ibrahima.
Yes, I think it is important that people understand the complexity of the situation in Mali, because we tend to think it's Islamists against the southern Mali, but I think it's more complex than that. And the situation in the south needs to be understood so that we help as media, we help to find solution in those, because by reporting, I think we help the international community, we help the Malian to also discuss the situation. So it's important that that complexity, we help people to understand that complexity through the discussion we'll have today.
Thank you very much. Lord Ashdown, wants to be known as Paddy Ashdown. Welcome to the panel. Would you brief us?
I think I'm probably here to learn more than to speak, but I'll give you 2 thoughts. This is not what you think it is. You think that this is taking what's happening in Libya, in Mali, up through the Maghreb, up into Syria. There's a sort of view that this is, I don't know, the usual Western black and white story, innocent citizens against tyrants in the case of Syria. No, it's not. Something much, much bigger than that. And in the case of Mali, we think that, Whitehall thinks, that this is a battle between, on the war on terror, in which Islamic extremists have as their enemy the West. And it's not that either. Actually, my proposition to you is that this is something much bigger and much wider. This is actually the beginnings of a major attempt to take over the the Sunni Ummah by a bunch of Salafists, largely funded by Saudi Arabia's private citizens, as indeed, of course, Al-Qaeda was, by Qatar, and also by the UAE, and as a precursor to the much wider battle, which is not against the West. We are the battlefield. We're not the enemy in this. The enemy is not the great Satan that it used to be, but the great heretic of Shia. And what's actually happening, what we're actually seeing now, is the beginning of the preparations for a much wider regional conflict between the Sunni and the Shia. So much less Islam versus the West as Islam versus Islam. And in case you think, and this is my last comment, that that's all comfortable because it's their problem, not ours, you need to remember that if you get a widening regional war in the Middle East, it cannot but have very, very serious global consequences. Mao Zedong used to call the European, World War I, World War II, the European civil wars. And in many ways, that's what they were. It's possible to have a regional war with global consequences, and that's what this is the beginning of, in my view.
Wow. Wilfred Willey is president of the Malian Community Council in the UK. your country, Wilfred, is a battleground, according to Paddy Ashdown.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yes, it is indeed. I'd like to join my voice to that of Ibrahima and stress that it's a very complex issue and one that is very difficult to assess, analyze, and just have a conclusion about in such a short period of time. It is complex in the fact that Mali has known not one rebellion, but several since it took its independence in 1960. But none of them had the impact and the severity that this one has brought.
So this is the worst since 1960?
That's right, because I say rebellion, that's how it started off on the 17th of January 2012. But it opened widely the doors to Islamist jihadists to sort of come in and do what we know they've been doing for the last 9 to 10 months. So it is more complex than we think, but we hope to give you some information today and to help you understand what this is all about.
Thank you. And Lindsay Hilsum is Channel 4's international editor, and she's just returned from Mali. Welcome. You're in perfect time, Lindsay. Give us 2 minutes of your briefing.
Thank you very much. I got back from Mali the day before yesterday, so let me give you just a little bit of a briefing of what it's like on the ground rather than the bigger issues which my co-panelists have mentioned. François Hollande is Papa Hollande, he's Tonton Hollande. Enormous numbers of Malians are wildly enthusiastic about this intervention. They may or may not be right, but this is what the feeling is on the ground at the moment. I rode into Gao on the back of a Malian military pickup. It was one of the most exciting things I've ever done. There were thousands of people who followed us and who went to our sides on motorbikes, women on motorbikes. They hadn't been allowed to ride motorbikes since the jihadis had been in power for 9 months. They were waving French flags. They were waving Malian flags. They were shouting Mali, Mali. They were absolutely thrilled with what had happened and that the jihadis had been pushed out of their town. I met the victims of Sharia punishments. I met 2 guys who had had their right hands chopped off because they had been accused of stealing motorbikes. I met 2 guys who were accused of being gay who would have been executed the Friday before last if it hadn't been for the intervention. That is the situation on the ground. However, as everybody has said, this is complex. And many of the people who spurred this uprising by the jihadis, or this takeover by the jihadis, were Tuaregs. And there is now a feeling of hatred and vitriol towards the Tuaregs that I heard from southern Malians and from army officers that made me very, very worried. Because my greatest fear now is that the joy will go down. We all know what it's like. People who are seen as liberators are later seen as occupiers. That's one issue. But the next issue is that people will look for who to blame for the situation, the mess Mali is in. And I fear very much that there is going to be retribution and that the days of joy will turn into days of revenge.
Right. So the first section we'll do is Who's Who. Please theme your questions accordingly. Let's start with the rebels. The reading I've done says there are ethnic rebels. There's the Tuaregs who are nomadic in the north. There's Islamists, and they break down into homegrown people who are religious, and Saudi land grabbers who we've heard about. And let's start with a more expert view of the rebels from Ibrahima Diane. Will you give us headlines, and I'll ask the panel to fill in?
Yeah, as Wilfred was saying right there, this started in the view of many as a legitimate battle from the Tuareg, which is a kind of recurrent battle.
And who are they?
The MNLA was the initial movement.
And who are the Tuaregs?
The Tuareg is a large community, and it's, as you said, it's a nomadic community, which is spread across Mali, Niger, Algeria, and a little bit of Burkina Faso and Mauritania. So these are nomadic community, but they live in Mali too, where this part of the country, they call it Azawad.
And after
the term Azawad isn't new, just didn't come just with this rebellion.
And after the fall of Gaddafi, they spread their wings a bit. Is that the sort of way we're reporting it?
I think it's a little bit complicated because people are saying they came from Gaddafi movement, but they had this movement before.
Okay.
Some of these people who are claiming the current rebellion were in Mali before. If you take Yada Gali, you take other people in that movement were in Mali before. Of course, Gaddafi at his time kind of proclaimed himself as a kind of a king of all African, but also particularly this community, because he was claiming he was coming from this community. And then that's one movement,
right,
which I think need to be really looked at carefully.
Let's look at the Tuaregs.
Yeah.
Okay, Tuaregs first. Paddy, it's your view that the Tuareg rebellion's been hijacked by these other forces, but do you have anything to say about the Tuaregs before you make that bigger point?
No, I mean, it's I don't think I have much more because I'm not an expert on Mali. I think I've made a bit of a study of intervention, and I think I've made a bit of a study recently on what the larger picture is, and I've described that to you. But what does an insurgent, what do religious extremists seeking to fight a religious war, and let's not pretend that only Islam has its extremists. I don't need to go to Baghdad or indeed to Timbuktu to hear death preached from a pulpit. I can go to Belfast. And I don't have to go to Syria or indeed to see a government that may be too religiously dominated. I might look at Bush, second-term Bush America. So we are afflicted in Christianity, probably more, with those who would wish to take over our religion for the cause of medievalism, ignorance and darkness, and by the way, brutality, as Islam is. But here's what's happened. It's exactly the same as you saw happening in Belfast with the IRA. They had a Catholic grievance. The grievance was exclusion. It was poverty. It was not being given a chance to participate in the democratic process. They made use of that to raise rebellion, and that's exactly what's happened with the Tuaregs.
So, that in mind, Wilfred, name names. What are the groups that are abusing the Tuaregs rebellion? Give us the names. Name the subgroups of rebels.
Well, the rebels are from the Mouvement National de Libération de l'Azawad, MNLA. The others are no rebels, let's face it. The others joined in to just take profit, to use the opportunity to have a go and take over the whole region, which, let's face it, makes up 2/3 of the Malian territory, or France plus Belgium, all, put together.
So name them.
Area. The names are Ansar-Eddin, or I think the Keepers of the Faith, or something like that. That's what it means. We also have the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and Mujao, which is the movement for oneness, some people say unicity, of jihad in West Africa.
And we've got the Signed in Blood Battalion. Who are they?
Well, they are a later joiners, and I think it's just an opportunistic movement. They didn't sort of do much in Mali, to my knowledge, until they sort of took the hostages or participated in the hostage taking in Algeria.
And when we hear you say later joiners, is that you agreeing with Ibrahima that you had this Tuareg rebellion, which was, and everyone's been piling in with their separate agendas?
Yeah, since independence, there's been at least 4 or 5 different Tuareg rebellions, 3 of which have been of some significance. And the last one now is, what we know. But the earlier demands were more of an identity nature. But the latest one was sort of hijacked by mercenaries coming from Libya and jihadists who already operated, somewhere in the Sahara, but saw this opportunity, seized it, because the area became a no man's land, to use it for training grounds and take over and sort of implementing the Sharia laws in an area which we know is almost 100% Islamized.
Can I ask Wilfred a question?
Yes.
Whereabouts in the spectrum of Islam do they come from? Are they Salafists, primarily that last category you talked about?
Salafist, would be the ACME movement is mainly Salafist because it derives from the GSPC, from Algeria, right? So there's that element. But the Ansar-Din is headed by Iyad Ghali, who, in fact, some people say has never been a proper Muslim because he wasn't a regular prayer. He sort of almost flirted with alcohol and stuff that are forbidden in Islam, and he went abroad and spent some time in I think in Afghanistan or Pakistan, and also he was sent to Saudi Arabia as a Malian diplomat because he had some demands, and the government at the time, just to sweep things under the carpet, got rid of him, sent him to Saudi Arabia as a Malian diplomat, from where he was later expelled because of his behavior, his contact with some Islamic circles.
And is it fair to say, Lindsay, that this is historically an Islamic land which is therefore open to people, as Paddy's saying, people who want to reclaim it for one sect or another, people who want it to be more extreme, people who want it to be more Western?
To some extent, but I think what I'd like to talk about a bit more is the Tuareg. The Tuareg are really the Kurds of Africa. They are a large ethnic group that has no homeland, spread over a number of countries, and that's why you have had these periodic uprisings. And not just in Mali. And not just in Mali, in Niger, absolutely right. So, but that's the thing, they have no homeland. And so they fought on behalf of Colonel Gaddafi. That was one of the things they did. And when they came back in 2012, after he was defeated, they were much more heavily armed than they had been before. Now, I think that one of the things that's really important to understand is when they came back and started their uprising or restarted their uprising for an independent state, what did the Malian army do? The Malian army dropped their weapons and fled. Why? It was partly because Tuareg officers who had been in the Malian army switched sides. And I think that this is really important for understanding why there is such bitterness and vitriol. Because the Malian army had absorbed many Tuareg officers after previous uprisings. And think what it's like as a soldier if the people you fight with one day turn around and point their guns at you. And that, I think, is one of the main reasons that you have this anger between many Malians, including the Malian army and the Tuareg.
So can I turn to the audience before I move to ask about the government? Are you any specific questions on this rebel, this split? We've heard of an ethnic, cultural split with the Tuaregs, and we've got a different spectrum of religious fighters. I'm going to move on, unless you tell me that you're missing. Yes to you, so wait for the microphone. And this is on the makeup of the rebels, this question. And anyone else, as you, sir? And then, no, this gentleman first, I think, had his hands up, and then we'll go there.
Hi, can you clarify where the Tuaregs stand on the Sunni-Shia split?
Sunnis.
Paddy said Sunnis.
Mainly Sunni, from my knowledge. But the Tuareg have not really been radical Muslim or preachers in general.
But they're regarded as being, I think, in the Sunni Ummah, in the Sunni community. I mean, by and large, it's right, isn't it, Wilfred, that Mali has been famous so far for the quiet, gentle, tolerant
nature of
the Sufis. But I just want, I'll make this point again, and I'll probably make it again and again. We look on Mali as the battle. It's not. It's one front line in a much larger battle. And there are lots of other front lines. One is in Egypt, where you see it so far peacefully in the politics. One is in Syria. It's all part of the same thing. And if we look at Mali simply as an event which we have to solve, you're never going to solve it because you don't realize that it's a part of something much bigger.
And please do make that point again, but we're on the rebels now. Over to you.
Yeah, I wanted to make the point that not all of the Tuaregs were in favour of rebellion. After the rebellion in 1990s, there was effectively a split, and a lot of the people who weren't happy with the peace deal which was worked out between the Malian government and the Tuaregs went north to Algeria.
And do you agree with our panel who are saying
went north to Libya.
And do you agree with our panel who are saying that whatever the nature of that fight, it's become hijacked by a lot of joiners, as Wilfred says?
Please
don't interrupt him.
Effectively, it's it's a Salafist war of choice.
So the Tuareg rebellion's been hijacked, you agree?
Absolutely.
And so the point that the Tuaregs are divided doesn't shake what the panel have said, which is it's been hijacked.
Well, it does in the sense that the Tuaregs now, the ones who were against the rebellion, now feel totally and utterly isolated.
Ibrahima will respond.
I think I agree what he's saying, you know, because, again, we tend to simplify the situation, saying that it's a Tuareg rebellion. Even if you take the north of Mali,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, but we can't tell everyone it's complex. We're trying to explain.
You know, but I understand.
No, so
I'm
that's
explaining
why
now.
they all paid 12 quid
Yeah,
to be having explained. But the
Paddy,
point
there's a
is...
serious point here.
Yeah.
Paris and London think it's simple.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well,
That's the
they
point.
do.
We've
I'm
just
not
got
sure
to
that
one
The
that's
point.
fair.
audience understood
Sorry?
that it is a complex
Well,
question.
we're not going to
No,
say...
we are
Now
explaining
we're
now.
explaining it
Anybody
now.
think it's simple?
No, we are just explaining.
That's all
So, the Tuareg rebellion's been hijacked, we agree. Let's
Yes.
not make it more
Yes,
complicated.
yes.
Over to you, madam.
Hello. I just wanted to add a point. The
Use the
Tuaregs-
microphone, please.
The Tuaregs people are not only people across Africa. Fulanis, for instance, don't have a specific state. Malinke
Very
as well. So it's not, an excuse to a rebellion.
Okay, fine.
point.
So,
Yes,
Good point.
just to add to that point, yes, it's the current boundaries, limits of the Malian state are imaginary. We inherited them from the French after the French colonization. So you will find Bambaras in Mali and Burkina Faso, who migrated to Cote d'Ivoire later to become the Jula people. You have Malinkes in the Wasulu region, between Mali and Guinea. It is not the reason, but the Tuaregs, for whatever reason, found themselves in this area, vast area of sand and Sahara Desert, where development is more difficult than in the south. And they had legitimate demands in the past. But again, it's been hijacked.
right, fine.
Now
So,
for-
no. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to talk about the government and the military in reverse order. Lindsay, would you brief us on the government? We'll hear what the whole panel wants to say, and then we're going to move on to the regional terror link in a moment. So this is about the government, please.
Okay. Right. There was this myth, which was that Mali was a model of democracy in Africa. It wasn't. It was a weak and corrupt state that happened to have periodic elections, and it muddled through.
Just like Iran.
Just like it, or I don't think it's just like Iran.
Periodic elections. Just periodic
Not like
elections.
Britain,
like-
don't
All right,
say that.
fair enough.
Just like Bosnia.
So, and then, when the war in Algeria finished at the end of the 90s, and some of those jihadists from Algeria moved south into Mali and started to do drug smuggling and kidnapping, they kidnapped a lot of Westerners, Europeans. The European governments wanted their people back. And so they went through the Malian government to negotiate. So what that meant was that Malian government officials and ministers were negotiating ransoms with kidnappers. And that led to more corruption. And it led to the north of Mali becoming this ungoverned space for drug smuggling, people smuggling, cigarette smuggling, and kidnapping for ransom. And the government was both corrupt and weak. So it was that, and it was because of that, and because the Western governments, the British, more particularly the French, wanted to believe that Mali was a democracy, and they also wanted to get their hostages back, so they turned a blind eye to all the problems which this system entailed, which is why we are where we are today.
And Wilfred, what can you tell us about the president installed after a military coup earlier in 2012?
Mr. Sanogo, where do you want me to start?
Well, Mr. Sanogo led the coup, I believe.
Yes.
I'm talking about the president.
the interim president, Dioncounda Traoré. Is
Sanogo is in fact the president. That's why he switched
well,
with him.
it's in the
complex.
shadow somewhere.
It's complex.
Yeah, it's as we say in French, il tire toutes les ficelles. So he's sort of
Pulling the triggers.
That's right.
But talk about them both. Talk about who the president is and who his backers are.
Well, I wanted to just join with Lindsay here, if you allow me, to go back to that period where we all thought Mali was a model of democracy. That sort of sort of reached its summum when Atete was elected as president. That's the one that was ousted, Amadou Toumani Touré. And because of the way he ruled, and because of the way he dealt with the rebellion, and I think that's to blame in part in what we're seeing today. Because every time there was an uprising, no matter how small in scale it was, he would go negotiate with them, bring in some of the rebels and integrate them into the army, give them positions in the government, give them money, and then we, as I said, sweep under the carpet.
And he was overthrown?
He was overthrown for being incapable of dealing with the serious uprising that...
By Captain Amadou Sanogo?
Amadou Sanogo, and who then was forced to sort of retreat and led an interim president to be elected to deal with matters.
Who is there now?
Who's there now, Mr. Dioncounda Traoré.
And he called in the French?
He called in the French when the very existence of Malian state was at risk at the time. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about this if he hadn't done so. And so he's a man who's been in the shadows of successive governments for years. He served under Alpha Omar Konaré. He's been the president of the National Assembly, Parliament, so to speak. And
Paddy,
for the last 5 years.
And are these people? Was the president of the Malian army?
Paddy, I can't add wisdom.
Fine.
I can only say this: that in that very powerful definition of Lindsay's, where she describes Somalia as, what does she say, weak, corrupt, failing state with occasional elections. You can apply that to almost any place where there's conflict. You can apply it to Somalia, you can apply it to Bosnia, you can apply it to Iraq, you can apply it to Lebanon, you can apply it to what Libya will become.
And several neighbors of Mali. And because we tend to forget this.
So these are unexceptional qualities. They do not make Mali something
but I think that the exceptional thing is this business of holding up Mali as a model of democracy, which certainly the French and the Americans did, which meant so how it's portrayed, and that I think blinded people to the problems which were being stored up.
Well, if you accept the president at the time, when the rebels, or so to speak, mercenaries, returned from Libya, Niger was straightforward, specific. You lay down the weapons, you enter our territory. What did Amadou Toumani Touré do? He said, come in first with your weapons, and then we negotiate.
Yeah.
A small group accepted, and God knows how much was given to them to sort of be quiet. The next group didn't accept. They joined forces with the rebels, and this is what we're having now.
Can I just come back? But it is in Lindsay's revelation about the nature of Mali, and I accept that one of the problems is that we thought it was something else in our simplistic fashion. It's in that you find the solution, because in fact, if you have states which have those ingredients, you have a recipe, the ingredients for conflict. And if you want to stop the conflict, actually you don't use forces on the ground. That's your last resort, because you failed in any other way. You've got to get ahead of the curve and solve those problems if you want to get rid of conflict. It's not about boots on the ground, except if you failed.
I'll come into this section in a moment.
Just a line about the political. Mali, for me, it's kind of irony. Because we talk about the, what do you call it, the Arab Springs. But the old Arab Springs, for me, started in Mali. In the 90s, with the movement of the students going in the street, protesting against the dictator, Moussa Traoré. So, and then, after that, everybody forget that one, accepted the regular elections. And, it's not, the Americans, the French, particularly those two, because the Americans trained the Malian troops, and we are surprised that the Malian troops are not well equipped. And those people, some of them, defected into and then we waited until they reached. And that's where the question would need to be asked. Of course, Dioncounda Traoré asked them to come to intervene, but they could have intervened before. Yeah.
Now,
because there is no border between Mali and Libya.
One of the troops trained by the Americans is Captain Amadou Sanogo.
Yes.
He received intelligence training from the United States. We're not moving on from this section until one of you tells us about him. Okay. Then we'll do the big theme.
Okay, let me tell you what I know. Okay. So, on, I think it's the 22nd of March, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, last year, Captain, Junior Officer Amadou Sanogo, trained in America, goes to the president's office and says, "Oi, out." Why does he do
The
that?
American president's office was that.
Oh, yeah, that's right, the White House. So why does he do that? He does that because the army are failing in their fight against both the MNLA, the Tuareg rebels, and the jihadis. Why are they failing? They're failing because they don't have enough training. They're failing because they don't have enough food. Why don't they have enough food? Because the money which should have been spent on logistics for the army has been eaten corruptly by the government. They don't have enough equipment. They do actually have some equipment, which they very kindly leave behind for the rebels. I'm just going to say one more thing, Paddy. You can let me do this. There was a fantastic story by the Associated Press who found Amadou Sanogo's parents, and they went along and said, well, what do you think about this? And his mother said, I turned on the television, and there he was. And I shouted up the stairs to my husband, look what your imbecile son has done now.
My mum used to say that when I joined the Liberal Democrats.
In case you missed it at the back, Paddy said his mum said that when he joined the Liberal Democrats. Ibrahima, Captain Sanogo, this man, Wilfred's implying he's pulling the strings. Is that your belief?
I
Until
think
recently.
I don't think now.
until recently,
Yeah.
and I think it still has some, some trigger around Bamako. Because of the presence of the MISMA, the African troops, and because of the presence of the French, it might have limited possibility. But I think still, because recently the people had to plead so that he can release some of the Amadou Toumani Touré former guards, the Beret Rouge, the Red Beret of the Malian army, which is an elite in the unit in the Malian army. So I think it's still, and this will be decisive because Mali is supposed to organize elections by July.
Yeah.
And I think Lindsay is approving.
Lindsay's weeping.
She's weeping.
So I think
It's a proposal, and
Yeah.
Sanogo
Sanogo is still doing something. And, we had in Guinea, neighbor Guinea, we had one such captain at some point.
that is
Okay,
Kamara.
Such captain.
over to the audience. I'm going to move on to the regional dimension after your questions on the government and the military. 1, 2, 3. Certainly starting with you, sir. The microphone's coming, and we'll come to this aisle. So this is about the military, the personages, the president, the Sanogo, anything to do with the government and the military. It's over to you.
Well, I'd just like a bit more history to explain some of this, because it does seem to me it's a completely artificial state by the look of it on the map. And is there anything from anybody, is there anything that all Malians support? Anything at all? Apart from the football team?
Sorry. Which lost to Nigeria today.
The music, I believe, is an export.
Yes, it's an
Peace and
export.
good
So, I mean,
governance.
are there any points in which
Islam,
there is
they
a
like
possible...
Islam.
Peace and good
98%.
governance.
Islam.
Very successful.
No. Well, one of you answer. Pat, do you want to take it? I'm coming to you in a minute, Paddy, on the regional terror. So, Wilfred, do you want to answer as the president?
Well, the Malian believe in their culture. They go anywhere, Malian are very proud of their culture. And
Okay.
that is, it shows in the way the Malian musicians have dominated for many, many years now the world music circles. I don't know, politics, people believed in it in the 90s when the first uprising against the dictatorship happened and, eventually was overthrown. And democracy, I say democracy was installed, people believed in it.
Okay.
Democracy is
They
less
Can I just
lost
say
faith
one?
in it.
All
Paddy
African,
first,
all
then you.
post...
Paddy first, then you.
Yes.
Democracy, believe me, is less important than the rule of law. And I'm trying to get us away from seeing Mali as a very specific case that leads... Look, the truth is that the thing that all people, I don't care who they are, Mali, Bosnian, British, Syrian, want to see and will unite them, is the rule of law, peace, and good governance. And if you won't deliver that to them, you'll find that somebody will use that infestation of distrust and in order to generate war. That's a common ingredient. If you want to tackle this, and this is where the West gets it wrong, so often we look at it, there's a military solution. That's what the Americans did. Train the troops.
Or there is a reconciliation happening.
Or it's got to be a military solution. Boots on the ground. Actually, it isn't.
Yeah,
it's a political solution you have to
Mr.
create. And if
Ashdown,
only we'd invest in that, you would have to use troops on the ground rather less.
Would the rule of law exclude the freedom of expression? Because we had rule of law in Tunisia, for instance. Ben Ali.
It's very interesting.
Oh yes, under Ben Ali there was order. order. The rule of law probably came later on.
Okay,
but
good question.
Order
after
first.
Ben Ali-
Good question. And to the audience now, to you.
So to complicate things a bit further, there's the MLLA has recently announced that there's factions emerging within it. One of which says that it would be happy to compromise the fight for Al-Assad for the time being, in order to partner with the Malian army to throw out the Islamist rebels. If that one, is that a possibility, and two, what would the implications of it be?
No.
Well,
No. Sorry.
That's yeah.
Go on,
I think there is you need to be there is the Ansardine. Just to clarify things, the Ansardine had a split movement called MIA, Islamic movement for Azawad.
Yeah.
And then, but they want a dialogue. And then you have the MNLA, which still claiming that they want their autonomy from the Malian troops, and they don't want Malian troops in their areas. But they were ready to help French armies to chase out the Islamists.
Well, two things changed in the MNLA speech, so to speak. The first one is they went from independence to autonomy within Mali. The second is they cannot decide what they really want to do. Now they want to side with the French to exclude Mali. So we have to be very careful. The MNLA, they're like snake, chameleon, they change faces all the time.
Okay, and to you, sir, with the microphone.
When the Gaddafi was toppled, I mean,
Can you please use the microphone?
when Gaddafi was toppled, I mean, it was a common knowledge that there were a lot of arms all over the countries. Why did the French and the English and the American leave the country without monitoring all these arms?
Okay, I'm going to come to your question later because it's not about the president and the government. But if you've got questions about the president and the government, I'm taking them and then I'm moving on to the region. Yes, sir.
You already had it.
Sorry.
No, I'm giving it to the gentleman at the back.
Yes,
I didn't
hello.
see anyone else.
What's the legitimacy deficit there? Because we know from Afghanistan, the case with Karzai, a government that doesn't have the legitimacy of its people, it's going to be very difficult for the West to make any kind of effective fight. So can the panel please tell us that about the
Lindsay,
legitimacy of that government?
does the interim president feel legitimate to you?
I think that he has a huge problem of legitimacy. He's not elected. He was sort of a character who came up through the coup. At the moment, I think that he has gained legitimacy through the intervention because the vast majority of Malians seem to support the intervention, and he has gained stature. And I was there when he was making a speech 3 days ago on Sunday, he looked and sounded much more presidential. People seem to like what he said, but I doubt very much that will last, and he will need some kind of, there will need to be further developments for him to have any real legitimacy.
Okay, and to you, madam, I think you've got the microphone.
Yes, this announcement that the elections will be on the 31st of July, does the panel think that's in any way realistic?
I don't think so.
I recognise that voice. You know far more about it than the rest of us. Where are you? Liz. Yes, I know you're there. Well, you know as well as we do, or better.
Who is the lady with the
She's
voice?
Liz Blunt. She's one of the greatest correspondents the BBC Africa Service has ever had.
We'll give her the microphone back. Would you answer your own question, Liz Blunt?
No, it's entirely self-interested. I've retired from being a foreign correspondent. I've been doing some election observing, and I'm dying to get back to Mali.
But what would your answer to the question?
what do you think?
Well, I'm awfully afraid that it's probably not realistic.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Can I make 2
But it
points?
was very
Well,
specific.
I'm going to ask you to lead the next section. You can bring.
On this particular issue?
Well, then I can't ask you to lead the next section
Good.
fairly because you'll have more
Good.
time. No, but go on then, but don't be long, please.
God, he really pushes.
You sound like
doesn't he?
David Dimbleby like this.
Yeah.
I want to make 2 points. I've no doubt the president's standing has been increased by the intervention. So is Karzai's. That won't last long unless he delivers good governance. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely right.
And the second, no, I'll keep that till the next one.
Right, so now we're moving on. Regional dynamics, and this is on the website that you've kindly paid to come here. The situation in Mali, the hostage-taking in Algeria. Is this a new front in the fight against terrorism? What are the consequences? This is section 2. Paddy Ashdown.
Well, yes, obviously, from what I said previously. The Prime Minister has said this will last 10 years. I think it probably will. But if you, or that order anyway, we should be thinking long term, not short, because that's the baleful thing we normally do. But if you think of Afghanistan and Iraq as a model for the next 10 years, then you're going the wrong way. And my worry is that is a prevailing thought that's in Whitehall at present. The truth is, here are two truths. First of all, using the purely military option, as we did in Afghanistan, as we did in Iraq, and as we're in danger in doing in Mali, not only doesn't work, and Iraq and Afghanistan should have shown that, but anyway, we can't do it. We don't have the troops any longer. We don't have the resources. We don't have the defense budgets to support that. And actually, that may be rather a good thing. If this lasts 10 years, it lasts 10 years because we do this in a different, cleverer, smarter way. We get ahead of the curve, as for instance we did in Somalia. We begin to use all the networks of skill that we have in order to build up the structures in those countries so that they can do this job for themselves. We concentrate on good governance. We concentrate on using our intelligence resources, our aid, for God's sake, our political resources in order to build up the capacity of those Islamic states who will be threatened because of bad governance by Islamic jihadists. When we have got to the point that they can more adequately defend themselves and look after themselves through the process of establishing good governments, we won't need troops on the ground. We won't need boots on the ground. Special forces may be part of that. You will have to use troops on the ground in the way that's happened in Mali, but only where you fail to do that adequately.
And the question here is it a new front in the fight against terrorism? But you were earlier saying it's a front in a war between Islamic groups.
But that is exactly right. I mean, that is what we have to look at here is the West is not the target. The West is the battleground. If you can do successful things to attack the West, as in the gas plant in Algeria, you use that to build up support in the Ummah. What we are seeing now is a takeover of the Sunni Ummah as a precursor, it seems to me, to a widening battle between the Sunni and the Shia, and we should be bloody worried about that. So the more we can prevent this takeover of the Sunni Ummah by increasing the capacity of countries to be able to look after themselves rather than need us to do it, the more we will avoid that outcome.
And who can stand between those sides? I mean, who's the force? Is it Western or is it African?
It's Islamic. I mean,
so you need an Islamic army to separate.
No, I didn't say an Islamic army. You need to make sure that those reformists in Islam who do not wish to see their religion taken over by those who propose medievalism, darkness, ignorance, and brutality, and there's plenty of those, win. You know, they're going to win that battle far more effectively than we are.
You know, you take Mali, about 90%, maybe more, Muslims. Yeah. They go to mosque every hour, probably more than some of the
5 times a day.
Neighboring Arab zone. So the thing is, you take the north of Mali, there's no development, there's nothing. And what at least we do, if I take the US and the EU, we tend to, instead of helping the agriculture, the farmers in those areas, we kind of just push them out so that they go away. They leave their lands, they go elsewhere. So, and then people would be coming from Qatar, from elsewhere, say, oh, we are just teaching you the Quran. And then it developed to something else. Because we knew before that in Timbuktu, which is a kind of a holy area for all Muslims in that zone, there was, scholar, religious scholar, and other people. So it was easy for these people coming from elsewhere to come and teach something else, show them that your Islam might not be. So the Islam that people are practicing in Mali, in Senegal, in those areas, need to be taken into account, need to be reinforced, but not just pushing them to go to the mosque every day, but helping them to do their agriculture locally, their cotton, locally, that develop schools in their areas, but that's not done. The Americans are giving subsidies to the agriculture, to the farmers for the cotton. Malian cotton is not well sold.
I would sum this up. Our allies, our best friends in this 10-year struggle ahead are not our Western allies with big armies. There are Islamic friends who want to recapture, regain their own religion for its true values and gain control of their region again. If we see that accurately, we begin to take the next steps accurately. If we don't and think this can be solved militarily, forget it. It can't. It hasn't worked in the past, and we haven't the resources to do it in the future.
Slightly different way of looking at it, which is to look at the region. One of the reasons we have this problem in Mali is because the non-jihadis won the war in Algeria, and therefore the jihadis moved south into Mali. So the danger you have now, at the moment they're in disarray and they're fleeing. Now they're going to come back and there's going to be a long guerrilla war. But this is an area with long desert borders. So you've got Mauritania, you've got Niger, obviously you've got Libya, and there already, we know, connections between, or we believe that there are connections between the jihadis who killed Chris Stevens, the American ambassador in Benghazi last September the 11th, and the groups in Mali. So that's one of the huge problems that you've got, that if you know, it's what the Americans called whack-a-mole. You push it down somewhere and it pops up somewhere else. And that is going to be a huge problem militarily and for all of these countries in the region.
Well, just a slight correction there, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I think the pro-jihadists did win the elections in Algeria. They were
Right, okay.
usurped. Basically, they were not fit to sort of rule that country at the time, because we know what they did later on. The frontier you ask about, the internationalization of this conflict, it cannot be stopped. What can be stopped instead is the radical elements that can make up the different groups. Military solution at this very moment is the only solution. Until Mali, yes, at this present moment, is the only solution, viable solution. Until we push out these dangerous elements, whom we know are sort of dealing in all sort of, doing all sorts of illegal activities in that part of the country, we cannot resolve the issue. Once they are pushed out, obviously the religion comes to it. Make sure that people who practice a peaceful Islam are reinforced, and they can sort of speak out and teach the youngsters, because the area is deprived, is underdeveloped. The next thing to do then would be to bring some kind of basis for a long, how would you say, durable development. Yes, sustainable development.
Can I make a point or ask Paddy a question?
Me a question, yeah.
Yes, I want to ask a question, which is, so what our allies, Britain's allies are Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, but that's the point.
And so that's what I want to ask you about.
That is exactly the point.
Yes.
We regard them as our closest allies, but they are funding the movement. They are funding the movements which we are fighting against.
Yes,
that's exactly it.
Ashdown. They're allies in simply for the fact that they buy weapons.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, also because they
sell oil, they give oil.
Because there are lots of oil and small things like that, but that's exactly the problem.
And that's the solution we need to avoid, because even you take Algeria, you take you take Niger, you take, for now, everybody is quite on Niger, everybody is quite on Mauritania, because Areva is there and France is protecting Areva, they're protecting
that's
uranium.
the uranium mine.
They're protecting Mauritania, they're protecting the gas in Algeria, and that's enough for them. Until those are safe, fine. But it's not that enough.
Yes. No, it's not. I mean, Lindsay points out precisely the contradictions of our policy. We're sending people, and the French, by the way, have spotted this. Their troops are now fighting against people funded by Qatar, by the UAE, funded by private sources in Saudi Arabia. I don't think, by the way, that would be allowed to happen if it was against the Saudi Arabian government's intentions. So here's a thought for you. One of the ways of resolving the crisis in Mali is diplomacy on Saudi Arabia, Qatar and UAE. And that's why you realize this is much wider than Mali. You have to use your levers elsewhere. Can I make a different point, which is about the widening regional point?
Please do.
Look, this is the same battle as being fought out on the streets of Syria. We think, the government, I'm afraid, does think a little bit, that the Syrian is Bosnia. I've heard it said in number 10, this is Bosnia all over again. No, it's bloody well not. Number 10 sees this as afflicted citizens and a tyrant, black and white. No. Actually, what's happening in Syria on the rebel side is that they too are now being Salafized. They too are becoming part of this. And by the way, in case you think that this is confined to Syria and Mali and Libya where it's happening and Egypt where it's happening, that's what reaches up into the Russian Islamic republics. Now, Russia's position isn't just because they want to hang on to Assad. They realize that this Salafist takeover of the Sunni Ummah is beginning to affect their own republics as well. So they are now being instrumentalized on the side of the Shia, because they see Iran as a block to this. We are being instrumentalized, not least by UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia on the side of the Sunni. By the way, guys, if this develops into a regional war and you have Russia instrumentalized on one side and us instrumentalized on the other, you got the message? This could be much wider than the Middle East. And unless you understand that wider context, you cannot resolve this issue.
I just want to add, because you said this before, I think it's also important that in each country we avoid being complacent, the international community avoid being complacent with the ruling government there, because that's what's happening. You know, one day we were surprised that Mali was not democracy. You know, Mauritania is just right there. It's a general who just switch
Let's go to the
uniform
audience.
to the suite, and then we are happy.
We're in the regional concerns now. To you first, then
I'd
to
like
you,
to
then
make
to
this
the
even more complicated.
Oh, good.
complex is the word we're using today.
Leave military and politics out of this and talk about the ferment in Islam, which goes back to Abd al-Qadir and the Pan-Arab Revolution, which was in Algeria. And that Pan-Arabism is reprocessed in the form of bin Laden and his caliphate. And not long after September 11th, they said there were 35 different cells of al-Qaeda from Indonesia to Morocco. There have been attacks in almost all these countries. This ferment inside Islam has been dealt with differently in different countries. In Algeria, it was dealt with against a popular election, which the Islamists won, and it was suppressed as brutally as Assad is suppressing what's going on in Syria. I think tens of thousands of people were torn to pieces by the government. And these are the people that rose up and attacked the oil fields in Algeria. These were not Malians. Mali is a soft spot in something which is geopolitical, and America has introduced something geopolitical to the region. And actually, if you look at what's going on in Syria, you can almost see a caliphate across the whole southern coast of the Mediterranean if things proceed in a certain way. But I think talking about military and how we shape is irrelevant, because it's a post-colonial revolution. We can't have the French going in there and doing all this, and we shouldn't be having opinions of this. This is something that will take 100 years in Islam to sort out. Islam will have to do it itself.
But I think if we have failed, as we did in Mali, to get ahead of this crisis, and some of us I was writing about this in December, there's obviously coming. If we fail, then troops are the last resort in order to stabilise the situation so you can re-establish a government.
Do you agree with that? You want us to get out, but actually they're saying you've got to get in.
I was fascinated about what Lindsay said, that they welcomed the French in again. I mean, sometimes I've heard Indians say they would welcome the English in again. I mean, I don't know, is that something that works? Can you imagine this?
Do you remember the way Blair was fated in Kosovo?
People look, to me that's not surprising at all. People are in a terrible situation. I was in Iraq when the Americans came in Baghdad. Day one, everybody loved them. Day two, they had doubts. Day three, they hated them. You know, that's a normal process.
Another one of our so-called allies have been the good guys, so-called, who won in Algeria. And my question really is about the GIA, the Algerian Secret Service. They've been accused of, over the last 20 years, and perhaps even the most recent incident, of many false flag incidents, because their goal has been to stir up trouble, to attract the boots on the ground, the Western money, accounting all too successfully on the stupidity of our governments. But what about the GIA? Do you see an influence right now?
I'm not an expert on.
Well, then don't answer that if you don't mind. Well, can I take your question and change it? The lady's asking about Algeria.
Yes.
If the French have driven out the jihadists from Mali, do they go back to Algeria? Is that
Some of them did. Well, that was what happened with the Bel Mokhtar had been in Mali, and his group, those of us who sign in blood, or they call themselves, were the ones who did the hijacking and hostage taking in the oil field. But I mean, the GIA, as an Islamist group, what people in Mali say, or what people said to me, was that the Algerian government has been playing a double game. That on the one hand, they have supported and pushed the jihadis into Mali because that was convenient for them. As long as the jihadis were in Mali, then they weren't taking hostages and so on in Algeria and disturbing their oil and gas boom. And so they allowed the jihadis to go backwards and forwards across the border to get fuel, to get vehicles and so on. But at the same time, obviously, they are against them because they are against them in their own government.
So you stumped the panel. They don't have expert knowledge on the GIA, but they're saying there's an Algerian impact of fighting the jihadists in Mali.
Well,
they're
the
going
GIA
to Algeria. Okay, to you first, you second, you third. Please go first.
Thank you. My question is for the entire panel. It's partly based on my experiences when I worked in the KFOR mission in Bosnia at more or less the same time as Lord Ashdown, and where it's very clear that a border which is not essentially geographically feature-based or ethnically based is simply not controllable. How effective do you believe the international community, both in military, law enforcement, development, the whole works, can, on a cross-regional basis, not just in Mali, coordinate everything? I have seen...
Can you leave it there? That's your question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Paddy and the whole panel.
If you will not deal with this across borders and across regions, you can't solve it. By the way, that was true of Bosnia as well. If you wanted to create peace in Bosnia, I had to deal with Belgrade, I had to deal with Zagreb. It's also true of Afghanistan. You know, you can't have peace in Afghanistan unless you can get buy-in from Iran, which we've totally failed to do, from the Russians, and of course from Pakistan and from India. These are all regional problems. Our difficulties in the Balkans was always that we saw the Balkans as a collection of penny packet policies, a policy for Bosnia, a policy for Serbia, a policy for Croatia, a policy for Montenegro, a policy for Kosovo. Actually, if you don't have a regional policy and play the linkages there, you cannot win. And if there is a revelation that's beginning to dawn, I think that one is. And I think that we are now, I mean, I actually look at what's happened to Somalia as a chink of light, because I think we've done the right things and begun to resolve what seemed an irresolvable situation by playing all our assets, but doing so on a regional basis.
But if we listen to you, it's almost an ideological policy we need, not a geographical one. If we listen to you tell us it's about Saudi and UAE.
We are there to help our Islamic friends create good governance for their people.
But it's not necessarily regional, is it? Because it covers different regions. It's almost supra-regional. Well, you need a new policy that is.
Where do you define a region? And what I'm saying is that if you want to look at this, you have to look at the region from the Eastern Mediterranean right through the Zagreb, right through the Maghreb, and right down into sub-Saharan Africa. Well, and if you don't do it that way, you can't solve it.
Yeah, I think at this present moment, what we're facing, this rise in the radicalization of the different Islamic groups, we need to sort of play on the pan-Sahelian or Saharan sort of
pride.
Pride. This cannot be solved by Mali alone.
Exactly.
We just established that Mali was not a democracy as we thought it was. The rule of law has been put in, questioned, and also we've seen that the Tuareg rebellion and the different uprising happened in almost all the countries, starting from Sudan all the way to Mauritania at the other end. So the solution will also come with unifying all the forces, but it cannot happen without legitimate governments being elected, in a fair way, basically installing true democracy in those countries. We know Algeria has had dubious sort of
but that's
behavior.
different. The question was about some kind of regional response.
Yeah, but there is one thing, I think, and every time I ask this question, how serious is the Western government in solving those situations in those countries? Because there is no coherency, there is no consistency. They need those to deal with, because you cannot say, look, we are going to, even France, we are going to solve the situation in Mali, we are putting our people there, and then on the other side, you cannot go to Algeria, you're refusing to ask Algeria to deal with the situation there, you're refusing Mauritania to deal with the situation there, you are, oh no, that's fine, we can deal with that later. It doesn't work. So I think they need coherency and consistency in what they're doing.
Okay. I'll just quickly say Nigeria to Boko Haram, that's got to be a big diversion.
Yeah.
But let us reflect, if we may, just one sentence, that we lost in Afghanistan because of the failure of the West to coordinate amongst itself. And unless the West does exactly as Ibrahim has said, you're not going to be able to develop.
Okay, no, Wilfred, sorry, we've got other questions.
Right.
To you, sir, with the microphone.
Paddy Ashdown talks of the true values of Islam. Islam, to me, looks to be inherently warlike as well as inherently anti-Semitic.
But does Christianity look the same to you as well? If you look, what about the Crusades? That was friendly, was it? Or?
Christianity is inherently peaceful. Christian actors do terrible things.
Christian actors do terrible things.
Excuse me. Answer this question. In the last 1,000 years, how many thousands? Sorry. In the name of which religion have more people been killed? Is it Islam or is it Christianity?
Not Christianity. Just as politics is not the same.
We'll be here all night.
All right, okay.
He's asked the question. He's allowed.
I am a Christian.
I just think we should recognise in
a
Christianity we have motes in our eyes too.
Why don't you stick up for your own side?
Ah, well, that's a different
Well, we're
issue.
taking sides.
My side, my
Can-
friend,
can
is
I-
humanity.
Can I just come up with
This
something? Can I
panel
just say something?
doesn't take sides.
Can I just say something? Which is that, as we have discussed, more than 90% of the Malian people are Muslim. That Timbuktu is the centre of peaceful Islam, of Sufi shrines, which were where it is the centre of learning for thousands of years. Where one of the things that we've been reporting on in the last week or so are the 14th, 15th, and 16th century manuscripts of Islam.
It's the sixth
From
holiest
Timbuktu.
city in Islam.
Yeah, these people were not violent. There was violence which was done to them by the jihadis who have come in the last 2 years or so. But the people of Mali, who are 90% Islamic, are not violent. Thank you.
Any religion, yes. Any religion can become violent because of the individuals.
Can I?
Yes.
An individual takes up the holy book, reads it, interprets it, becomes violent.
What do we want? Sharia law? When do we want it? Never.
Never.
And that's the problem.
No,
That's
I'm
the
sorry.
problem.
I'm sorry. If they choose to have Sharia law, I mean...
But they didn't choose.
Well, okay, if it's forced on, that's a different thing.
That is what happened, though.
That's what happened.
My lord,
Paddy,
usually,
Paddy.
I don't think anyone has chosen...
They were going to call
He
you my
was,
lord.
he was talking to me. He was talking to me. That's the point. That's the point. They have had it forced. This gentleman's correct. They have had it forced on them. They didn't want it.
Most
In a
countries
warlike way, they've had it.
Most countries where Sharia laws is the law...
Yeah, they don't want... No one wants it. They
no
get their
one's
arms
chosen
cut off.
to have it. But it does have... Yes, it does have some positive sides.
Oh,
of it.
please.
No, when it does have. Some countries...
The trains run on time.
They mix it with laws and make... You know, it has positive
I'm
sides.
going to change the subject slightly and ask my friend
Again,
this.
it's individuals.
Sir, have you by any chance ever been to Siena Cathedral? No. May I recommend that you do? Siena Cathedral was founded and built, by the way, in half its size that it was originally planned, and it was almost regarded as being the foundation stone of the Renaissance, the great aspiration of the Hellenic texts that were the foundation stone, the fountainhead of European values and humanity. And on the floor of Siena Cathedral, take a look at the pavimenti, and what you see there is not religious figures. You see Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. Why? Shall I tell you why? Because those Hellenic texts that we regard as the fountainhead of our European values had just been discovered in which university? Baghdad University, where they'd been preserved by Islam and incorporated into Islam while we were killing each other in the Dark Ages. There are no... We have used the sword, sir, and I have, rather more than we may like at times to admit. But here's the singular point. These values are universal values. They don't belong to this religion or that. They are universal values, and unless you look at them that way, you won't understand how to do it.
Right, let's move on.
No, Wilford, sir, your question is very welcome. It's a public meeting, and thank you for your question. And we're going over here now. Would you like to ask one? You've got a microphone. Do hold it quite close, or it's useless.
Don't be frightened. Please ask questions.
What do the Saudis want? And Lord Ashdown, if you were sent in to negotiate, how would you do it?
Very good questions, eh?
Listen, I led the Liberal Democrats for 11 years and was in Bosnia for 6. I don't want any more of that, if you don't mind.
You are just a man.
No. What do the Saudis want?
It's a very good question.
It's a really good question. I think we are quite stumped, and I think that also, what do the Qataris want? And that's another very complex issue for those of us who are reporting the region at the moment, because we find Qatar playing an increasingly important role, and on the one hand we find them supporting Muslim Brotherhood, and on them at other points we find them supporting Salafists, and then at other points we find them backing things like Al Jazeera, which is, Al Jazeera English is one of the best, if not the best, TV channel, news channel in the world, which has absolutely fantastic correspondence and brilliant coverage. And so I think that we really I certainly don't know. And as for the Saudis, I think that one of the things was extremely complicated. When I was in Gao, I went to a jihadi bomb factory, a jihadi bomb-making factory we were taken to by the military. And one of the things we found was a a money transfer from an individual in Saudi Arabia, which was the first evidence I've seen of Saudi backing. I'm not saying Saudi government, Saudi backing for the jihadis. Nobody put it there. I found it on the floor and on the ground. So I don't think that there's any question that there are ideologues in Saudi Arabia who want exactly what Paddy Ashdown is saying, this Ummah. But what I think we don't really know, or I don't really understand, is what the government wants. I think that that's where I find it very difficult to understand.
They probably want influence, just like any other government.
But can I say, in Sarajevo, isn't it the case that the speakers on the mosques after the war were funded from Saudi money? It
didn't make any difference. The Bosnians, bless them, are completely unradicalizable. They went back to their rakia, and the girls in the Farahadiya, thank God, Muslim or not, still wear very short skirts. You can't conceivably radicalize a Bosnian Muslim.
But
you can radicalize somebody from Birmingham.
Question. You haven't answered the other question about negotiation, which was a very good question. What would you negotiate and who with? Sorry.
I think you have to negotiate, Lindsay. How else would you do it with legitimate governments that are elected by the people? You can't say, I don't like your particular government because I regard it.
Well, how do you deal with the jihadists in the MNLA then?
Well, I think I've suggested to you that the way that you deal with the jihadists is to build up the protections against jihadism taking over by establishing the rule of law. We'll talk about what kind of law later, providing good governments and giving people security. If you do that, they won't turn to I mean, that's I think, the strategy.
And to you with the microphone?
But I'm not a negotiator of this. I don't know enough about it.
This question might be getting a little bit ahead of things because obviously the military are in there and good governance and those sorts of things take time to settle in. I'm just curious about a piece of the jigsaw that's not being mentioned at all. I have no idea what the economic underpinning of Mali is. What do you export? What do you do? Is the country poor? Where do you have taxation? I don't know. Where does it go? Is the corruption actually coming out of the economic situation? And I'm just curious about that and which countries have an interest economically in Mali and some of those other areas, because obviously Algeria's got gas and oil, but what's Mali have?
Yes. Oh,
will you answer this, Ibrahima? And
yes,
then I won't take the whole panel on.
No, it's fine.
Ibrahima, will you give a quick sketch about economy of Mali, and then we'll move?
Mali is a poor country, simply. And they, of course, the country is, they're mainly known for the gold. They export a lot of gold, and I'm not sure which rank they are now, but they have, and that we were sort of, the gold product mining hasn't been affected by this crisis. And they produce also cotton. There is another resource for Mali. It's a Malian diaspora that we tend to forget, but the Malian diaspora send a lot of money back to Mali.
5 million Malians outside Mali? Or?
Yeah, but they send, the money they send back to Mali is then higher than the international aid to Mali.
Do you send money to Mali?
Every day.
Almost. How much do you send?
Oh, don't ask.
I'll write it down for you.
Well, for the price of a ticket today, 10 quid, what could you buy in Mali?
10 quid? Ooh, you can buy a 50-kilo bag of rice. But the economy, to come back to the economy, Mali's economy is based on gold mining and cotton, none of which, by the way, are in the hands of the French. Because since the French started intervening in Mali, my phone never stopped ringing. And each time I get given the opportunity to speak, whether it's on the radio, on the TV, the first question, what are the French after?
Right, that's coming, that's coming.
So that will come. But the economy, Mali is a relatively poor country. Now, I will define to you what poverty means in another debate. But it's a relatively poor country. There is no economical interest, so to speak.
Thank you. And you said there's a lady in the audience that you'd like to speak?
Yeah, she's a Malian. She can tell you how much the bread costs.
Tell us the answer to the question, then we'll move on to international. Would you like to brief us? What could I get for 10 quid in Mali?
Quite a lot, actually.
Which is 8,000 francs CFA, more or less, 8,000 francs.
To be honest, with 10 quid, a whole family can live out of that.
For how long?
For a week, for instance. A whole family can
Depends
live
where
out
you are.
of.
In Bamako, it won't get you past the second day.
No. I don't agree with you.
Maybe you keep a better house.
Some people are so poor. It depends on which.
Usually, Malian families are very big.
No, it depends on which layer of the society we're
Okay.
But some poor people can live out of 10 quid.
It's a good measure of how poor
Paddy,
a country is.
can I just say something there?
Is it quick?
It's a very poor country. The first time I went to Mali was 1999. The second time I went was August last year. I was shocked at how little development there was. I was shocked at the poor state of the roads. I was shocked at how millions of pounds of development aid, particularly from America and the French, have done nothing. It was an example to me of how aid is not the answer, because in all these years of getting lots and lots of aid and it being a favourite for NGOs because it's a friendly country, I really felt that the people of Mali had scarcely benefited at all.
Now, let's move on. The third and final section, the international community. Was Hollande right to intervene? What are the implications? Are we set to see further intervention? Wilfred, I interrupted you. And, sir, earlier, I think you might be French. I interrupted you, and I'll take your question, which I interrupted. Are you French? Yes, and I interrupted you earlier, and in a moment I'll come to you first. So the question, Wilfred, is, was Hollande right to intervene?
Well, I think that question could be asked to the people of Kona, Jabali, the people of Douenza, those on the front line who had lost all hope. And when the French were called upon, their intervention gave that hope back to thousands of people. Now, were the French right to intervene? Mali is a founding member, in fact, of the organization of the Islamic Conference, which regroups pretty much all the Muslim countries in the world. Now, Mali is surrounded by Muslim countries. Mali has suffered 9 months, up to 10 months, of under the Sharia law and the invasion of these Islamic groups. No one has helped Mali during that time. Now, I don't think any Malian will disagree with the intervention of Mali. In fact, if it was Uzbekistan coming to Mali's aid at the time, no Malian would have said no. We just wanted someone to come and help us deal with these people, because no one country could have done it on its own. So the French, yes, were right to intervene in Mali, in my opinion.
I agree with that. But I think we should acknowledge that intervention is the easiest part. It's actually what comes next that's difficult. You know, if you're fighting guerrillas and you turn up to a town and they've left, that's not a victory, guys. That's what guerrillas are supposed to do.
Yes.
And to call that a victory is very stupid. We went into Mali, the French went into Mali, under UN Security Council resolution and with the overwhelming support of their people. By the way, those two conditions are exactly the conditions in which you went into Afghanistan. Yeah. The intervention is easy. It's what happens next and how you convert that from a military intervention that stabilizes the thing. This thing isn't going to be solved by soldiers any more than Afghanistan was. And that's the mistake we've consistently made there. It's actually solved by a political solution. All soldiers can do is hold the ring while you construct a political solution that can deliver order, law, good governance, and peace. If you can do that, it was a success. If you can't, it isn't.
The difference is that we went into Afghanistan without being called.
No, we weren't called.
Well,
overwhelming support of the Afghan people.
Support, but did anyone ask for help to come and help? No. Now, Mali was in great need of help. These people maybe made the mistake of attacking the first town over the borderline.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, Wilfred.
And they were going to Bamako, the capital city.
All I'm saying is intervention is the easy bit. It's what happens now that's different.
I agree with that. But you had to give back the hope to the people. Yeah. The UN resolution could have been implemented within 9 months, they said. The earliest any intervention was possible was September 2013, i.e. another 9 months. I don't think the Malian people could have sat down and waited that long. I'm sure something will have happened. We wouldn't be sitting here.
On the immediate now, it was one of the best decisions from François Hollande. I think in his 5 years term, because I think 2 weeks before, he refused to go to Central African Republic.
Yeah.
Just 2 weeks before. And in that week, he went to France. But one thing I just want to say again, this took 9 months for the international community to see that Mali was at risk. I think it's, there is something there that they should have been intervening before.
Okay, this gentleman I was interrupted by me earlier. Would you like to give us your contribution now?
Yeah, I wonder why the West, when they were in Libya, the French, the British, with the American, why they were unwilling to monitor all the stockpile of arms, and where there were no monitoring of the border between Libya and southern country.
I mean, Lindsay probably knows this better than me, but because the Libyans said, we don't want you in. You've helped us to win our war, now we're going to govern the peace. But you're dead right in saying this, that after a war, you cannot have an established peace until the government can establish for itself the monopoly of the use of lethal force. And our failure to enable Libya to do that has created the circumstances we now find ourselves in. In case you criticize Libya too much, whatever the internal chaos and lack of stability from Libya, you need to ask yourself, is it worse when the Libyans have done it for themselves or when we tried to do it in Iraq? I don't think it was much better when we did it ourselves in Iraq, frankly. Just as much a mess.
I think one detail to remember is that most of the mercenaries fled Libya to come to Mali, were in fact called by Colonel Gaddafi to fight his wars for him. They've been living in Libya for years. Some of them had Libyan nationality. So they came. Mali doesn't have any borders with Libya. But they were left after Gaddafi was toppled. They fled the country because they were unwanted. The Libyans resented them greatly. So they had to flee the country and come back to the country of their fathers, of origin, with weapons.
And the gentleman's question is why nothing was done about this huge arms bazaar they've called
I mean, there was an enormous, I mean, you're absolutely right, but I think that one of the reasons for that was because the international intervention in Libya was primarily by air. It was not boots on the ground, so there weren't that many people. There were special forces on the ground, and the special forces did attempt to secure some of these sites, but I think that once they'd established that there weren't chemical weapons and so on, because that had been, that had been given up earlier, I think that there were just too many weapons, and there were too many weapons. But I've never seen as many weapons dumps and as many weapons as I did in Libya. I mean, thousands and thousands of old tanks and things.
To you, Dex.
Please
hold it right there.
I'd been watching what was going on a bit and noticing the shrine, the Sufi shrines all being destroyed. The Sufi shrines being destroyed, and then the musicians had made quite a few. There'd been quite a lot of coverage over here about.
Can you hold it right there?
About the musicians and musicians saying that how frightened they were of Sharia law and threats to them having their hands cut off and everything. And then I was trying to publicise that a bit, but worrying. When the French did intervene, I didn't realise the West was going to intervene, and I'm always sort of worried about, as probably lots of people here are, about foreign intervention. Sorry, I'll have to go a bit closer. And
what's your question?
My question is that when the musicians a couple of weeks ago made a statement about what was going on, and they made a song, and it was publicised in Mali and worldwide, I was quite confused about what they were saying, because they were just calling for peace. There was one line in the song where they said they were against Sharia law. They didn't want Sharia law. That was about the fourth verse. But most of it was just about wanting peace. So I couldn't tell from their statement what they wanted in terms of foreign intervention. And I wondered if anyone knew.
And the music is said, when you do the reading as an ignorant person, they say, Mali and its music is world amazing, such an export. And the lady's saying, we were listening, but what on earth are they saying? Is there something from the artistic communities, anything being said?
Which song are you referring to? The one by Fatou Diawara?
There was a press conference in the capital, and they sung a song. It was publicised a lot over here. It was on the international lot. But I wasn't clear what they wanted, because it was all about wanting peace.
Does the video show a recording in the studio with several Malian artists singing? Umu Sangare.
Musician whose name I can't
remember,
and she'd written the song.
I think it is Fatou Diawara one, the Maliko.
Fatou Diawara, Maliko.
And it was all about peace, and just this one sentence about Sharia law. And as I said, I didn't know what they wanted in terms of intervention.
Okay. Do you know, Wilfred?
What they wanted.
There was no mention of the intervention.
In the song?
No.
Okay.
There was no mention of the intervention.
To you there with the microphone.
Yes, we mentioned a few minutes ago that there was a massive disagreement among the international community before the French intervention. Do you think this intervention will change the things, and that we'll have a more common approach of the situation in Mali with the French intervention?
Good question.
I think, the intervention, as Lord Ashdown said, is not the solution to the only solution.
But it was a success. Will it trigger more intervention?
If we're stupid.
Well,
before the French, Britain did it in Sierra Leone.
2000.
If we invest, if we were prepared to, sorry.
So I think, you know, and for now, what they are doing, and I think I'm not sure they agree all on this, because they are going, each one saying, oh, I'm sending 200 troops to the region. It needs to be coordinated in the region, sending people around in those regions, training those military in that region, and ensuring that the rule of law is in those countries.
And the question is, will there be a more common approach? Paddy, Wilfred, Lindsay, will there be, the gentleman's question is, there was all this bickering among the West, couldn't agree, suddenly it's worked, will we now see a change? Something
It's
more
worked so far.
Yes. Paddy, you go first.
Well, I'm not sure. I hope it will, because if we won't coordinate, we're not going to be able to achieve anything. I mean, let's just put it this way. If, in a coordinated fashion, the West, who want to see this battle won by moderate Islam against jihadist Islam for reasons of their own security, were to dedicate half the amount of money they would have to spend for military intervention on aid, assistance, I think you would resolve many more problems than you will do by putting boots on the ground in this area.
Wilfred?
Well, the French intervention would have sort of called for more intervention in a normal sort of war scenario. But this is not a normal war scenario. Many people, many countries are happy to see the French do the dirty job. They will not put boots on the ground. They will help the French stay in Mali as long as they can by providing logistical assistance, by providing transportation, all the stuff to make the French feel sort of wanted, if you want. So no more intervention, I don't think, but more help from other countries.
Well, the key thing is what happens with the African forces, because the French are supposed to now take a back seat, and there is a coalition of African forces coming in from a wide variety of African countries. Now, the issue on coordination there is what backup they will get. African peacekeepers have a poor record. They were bad in Sierra Leone, they were bad in Liberia, they will be bad in Mali, unless there is a lot of help given to them. And most of that help must be logistics, because armies which don't have logistics prey on the people.
Okay, two more questions.
Let me finish. And the issue of human rights abuse is really important. It's not a soggy liberal issue. The issue of human rights abuse, if the African armies go in and commit human rights abuses, and if the Malian army continues to commit human rights abuses, then the conflict in Mali will go on, and the issue of retribution will go on and on. So one of the most useful things that the Western governments can do is try and assist those armies in not doing that. And that, I think, if they can coordinate on that, I think that would be an extremely important
Such an important point. If we were to, as a Western group, in a coordinated fashion, spend money, effort and political will on building up the capacity of those regional forces, the African Union forces, it would be much better than preparing troops in the middle of France to fly out to Mali.
1, 2. What, you first, then pass it to the guy behind you.
I have a question specifically for Wilfred. I heard you present towards the end of last year in a discussion at the House of Commons in which you mentioned that a military intervention should be the last option and that all other alternatives should be explored beforehand. But you appear to have changed your opinion.
What's the last option?
No, not at all.
Well, I'd just be interested to know what it is that, in fact, that has changed your opinion. And did you agree with the French intervention when it actually happened? Or is it with the benefit of hindsight where it appears to have been a relative success that you now feel that it was the correct thing to do?
Thank you for that question. The question at the time at the Parliament was, should we negotiate with MNLA? And at the time, I said no. Military option was the only option at that moment because the conflict was getting out of hand. And Mali couldn't do it on its own because of the reason we know. The military was not ready, etc. I agreed with the French intervention from day one.
Okay.
Because, let's face it, come on, Kona was the front line. People were desperate. People were desperate. If they had taken Kona and stayed there, they were moving on to Sevare, where there is a big military barrack with I think there is an airport.
Yeah,
that's the supply chain.
Thank you,
broken.
Wilfred. You've answered the question. You did agree with it. And to you?
Yeah, just a quick question. I've heard the panel talk about the regional perspective on this, and it seems to be the one thing that they're all agreeing on, that there is, addressing this issue, needs to be addressed from a regional perspective. And I heard Lindsay talk about the issue of coming to one country and something else pops up somewhere else. My question is, what's next, where?
What's next, where? Right, and panel, can you also prepare your closing remarks, answer this gentleman's question, and then something that was left unsaid or misunderstood, I'll come to you for a second bite. What's next, where, Ibrahima Diane?
I think, there is two aspects now. The military intervention, because not just in Mali, but in the region, not sending troops there, but ensuring that they are not, as Lindsay said, they are not just coming out of Mauritania somewhere or going in Mauritania and then coming back.
Is this an answer to the question, what next, where?
Yeah. No.
Well, please give me your closing remarks in a moment. Give him the answer now, and then do your closing remarks.
I think the next in Mali would be to organize free and fair elections and also be able to secure the north. And in the other countries, then you will have, there's one thing we haven't mentioned, is that there is this ICC case on Mali, and I think they shouldn't stop on the announcement. They should continue the case.
Paddy Ashdown, what's next, where?
Nigeria.
Yep.
Boko Haram, etc., etc.
That's what's next, probably. Actually, the truth is you don't know what's next. That's the point about it. But if someone said, Paddy, we're going to shoot you against that wall if you don't tell me what's next, I would say Nigeria.
Wilfred?
I wouldn't say any specific country. There is a vast, roaming, really free bands of sort of extremists who don't know any borders.
Opportunism is next.
Opportunism, yes.
Lindsay?
What's next is the guerrilla war in Mali. On my way down from Gao, we came to a military convoy, and we were very glad, because otherwise we would have run over a landmine. There was a landmine on the road from Gao at a village called Gossi, which had blown up a military vehicle the night before. There was a broken chair and a yellow jerry can. They marked the two mines which had not yet exploded. Since I left yesterday, there were more mines in the potholes around that area. That's what we're going to see over the next 6 months or a year.
And can I just ask, Lindsay, there is no way that number of French troops, sufficient to take Timbuktu, there is no way they can dominate that space.
No, they can't.
None whatsoever.
So finally, panel, can I ask you the thing that you didn't say, the thing you took from the evening, the point you want to reinforce, starting with you, Ibrahima Diane, and then ending with you, Lindsay Hilsum?
I want to be optimistic about the fate of Mali and the fate of this region because, you had worse situation. You had Sierra Leone where, because people have voted in the democracy, their hand was cut. So I think I'm optimistic that the next in Mali is the elections. And the Gorea, I'm sure it would happen because that region, as you say, it's vast. But, you have people now there who can do that battle. The Chadian, the Nigerian are aware of what they are doing. Of course, but the international community have a key role, which is to have a coordination, but to be coherent, because they will today try to solve the situation in Mali, but they are ignoring the situation elsewhere.
Listen, Ibrahim knows about 100 times more than I do about this, but I've just got to tell you, if elections solve your problem, I'll buy you dinner in the House of Commons. The House of Lords.
Elections solve problem.
No, they don't.
They solve problem here.
Well,
you don't want someone, you put him out.
Yeah, but hang on. But hang on, Ibrahim.
No, they solve problem here.
Let me just tell you, in a post-conflict country, and this is exactly what we did in Bosnia. We had one policy of the West, elections, and we had 6 elections in 6. If you do not, first of all, create the rule of law as best you can, all that an election will do, let me tell you, go and have a look at Bosnia, and you'll see it very clearly, they will embed the corrupt structures into the process of an elected government. You do not get a free. You do not get a free. You get a criminally captured state.
Yeah.
So the first thing we should be doing. Maybe there isn't time to do it. I understand why you have to have elections early.
No. I'm not saying to have an election early.
If you create the rule of law, that's our first priority. And then if you have done that, your
But you
elections
won't
will...
have a democracy, you won't have an election
All right,
without
all right.
the rule of
so
law.
The
They go
disagreement,
together.
disagreement aside, Paddy Ashdown, your own closing comments.
That's it. That's
okay.
it.
You need the rule of law. That's your closing.
Our priority and the place we fail always, we did it in Afghanistan, we did it in Bosnia, I bet we do it in Mali, is to do a deal with the people who happen to be powerful at the time, who are almost always the corrupt. You then have elections. If they're corrupt and the people who ran the war, they're going to be in control of the peace as well. All an election will do is embed those people in the process of your government. You don't end up with a democracy, you end up with a criminally captured state. Start with the rule of law, not with elections.
Wilfred and Lindsay.
If you can.
I think what Mali needs right now is to make sure that the Islamist elements are kicked out of the country, or as far as possible, and that the Malian state is Malian state's presence is restored in everywhere there is Malian land, and only then a dialogue can take place, and that dialogue should be inclusive. Now, the Malian government should only negotiate or sort of open dialogue with true representative of the communities in the north, right? Because the Tuareg rebels are not representative of the Tuareg community in the north.
No, I'm sorry, you have to ask him afterwards. Lindsay, your closing thought.
I'm just going to bring it back to the people I've met in the last 3 weeks that I've been in Mali and the people I've met when I was there last year. I'm thinking of the 2 men who had their hands cut off in Gao. I'm thinking of the women I met who had been raped. And I'm also thinking of 2 wells in Sévaré. These were wells where the victims of retribution, possibly by the military, possibly by ordinary people, had been, those wells were covered in blood and the bodies had been stuffed down the wells. So those are the 2 sides. These were victims of both sides. There are more than 2 sides, but in the 2 main sides in the civil war. So for me, the most important thing is that there has to be a process which involves reconciliation, which involves some kind of negotiation, which involves the rule of law, and which involves the installing of human rights. Because if you don't have that, then the people I've met and who have been incredibly welcoming and were very excited and delighted with this intervention, those people will be let down and those people's lives will never improve.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of all of us, can I thank our panel who've been very rudely interrupted at times.
That's true.
But you've really briefed us fantastically from the beginning. Lindsay Hilson, Channel 4 News, Wilfred Willey, who's president of the Malian Community Council in the UK, Paddy Ashdown, don't call him Lord, and Ibrahima Diane from BBC Afrique, and to you, the smartest and best-looking audience in London as well, may I say. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
I read a book.
Do I get a glass of wine now, do you think?